I'm Tim Langston with Red Dog Bushcraft, and today I'm going to make a little bit of walnut dye. I have some walnuts I picked up here. They're starting to get big enough now. I think we can make some dye out of these. I'm simply going to boil them in this can with some water. I'll bust those shells up, and the purpose of making this dye is I made a new knife this week, and this is the knife I made, and this is maple that I use for the handles, and I'd like to dye that before I try to seal this up. So stay with me. We'll get a little fire going here, and we'll see if we can't make up some of this dye. Alright, nothing fancy here today, guys. Just a quick fire to make this dye and see if we can cook a little dinner over the campfire tonight. I'll get this going and I'll be right back. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these walnuts. I simply take a rock and smash these things and open them up. We want to get this green hull. That's what's got the dye and tannins and the material in it that we want for making this dye. And I'm not doing anything to them except busting it up and taking this brown and green, separating out the nut and dropping them down into my container here that I'm going to just cover the top with water and boil those down until I get a nice dark dye. Now this is the same dye that you would use to color material. It gives it a kind of a brownish, greenish brownish earth tone type color. Makes a good camouflage. And one thing you notice is I'm wearing gloves here, and unless you want to stain your hands, and I'm going to tell you from experience, once you stain your hands with this stuff, you're going to have it for a while, at least a week or so. It does not clean up with soap and water very well, especially if you wait any length of time at all to start cleaning your hands. You have to wash them almost immediately, and even then you're not going to get all of that stain off of them. So anyway, let me bust these up, put them in this container, and I'll be right back with you. Okay, we have our green hulls inside of our coffee can now, and it's just a little bale on top of that coffee can made out of a coat hanger. And I'm going to cover that with water. And I'm going to make sure it's covered good because we're going to reduce this and boil it down. Now all I've done to boil this is I've taken a little forked stick here and broken it off so that I can use that to keep my cordage away from that handle so it doesn't melt through this bank line. And then I'm just going to tie that up to the tripod over top of this fire, and we'll start cooking it down. If the light stays with me today, I'll show you what that dye looks like. Okay, we've got our can over the fire now, and we've got that starting to boil. And the nice thing about using the tripod is I can adjust that by simply spreading the legs out or raising them up to get more or less heat on my can and keeping it from burning my cordon too. I can keep the temperature about where I want it as I add and decrease my fire. So we'll boil this up and see what we've got. Well, as our dye cooks up, let me show you just a little bit of the knife that I made this past week. Like I said, the handle is made out of maple, and that's pinned with a couple of brass pins. And I used 2-ton epoxy to epoxy the wood to the metal handle. I made the end round so that when I'm using it in the palm of my hand, it doesn't have any corners. That's specifically made for both skinning game and for making a bow drill set. As you can tell, the front of the blade curves up quite steep on the end, and that of course is for skinning game also. This blade, the knife itself, is made out of an industrial lawnmower blade, and it was all done by material reduction. I did not heat treat this steel in any way. I figured it was already treated to withstand the rigors of being a lawnmower blade. I was just very careful as I worked the steel not to let it heat up. Now, it did sharpen up extremely well, and when I say extremely well, I mean extremely well. It'll shave. How to hold an edge is yet to be seen. But the reason we're making that die is to see if we can't bring out some of the grain that's in this absolutely gorgeous wood. This was a piece of hardwood flooring that a friend of mine was putting in his house, and he gave me a couple of scrap pieces. I think it turned out rather nice. I'm definitely proud of it, and next step is to make a nice leather sheath for it. So stand by on the die.